Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of Wheels Up, where we talk about all things transformative, such as electrification, sustainable solutions, digital connected infrastructure, and rapidly advancing technologies. I'm your host, Jessica Kinman, and with me is my co host, Alex Ramirez. Today, we are joined by aerospace engineer and Harvard MBA co founder and CEO of Stell Engineering, Malory McLemore. Stell Engineering is a new software startup based in Los Angeles that plans to make aerospace and defense part ordering more efficient and effective across the supply chain, which we know everyone is looking for. So, what is that industry problem? When it comes to communicating the deeply complex technical information critical to aerospace engineering to the supply chain providers, a lot can get lost in translation, resulting in long delays, costly back and forth overhead, and in many cases, having to rework delivered products. Malory experienced these problems firsthand working as a liaison and product manager at companies including Airbus, Raytheon, and Hadrian. At Harvard Business School, Malory teamed up with Ann Wen, who's a fellow graduate who had experience getting space startups off the ground, and the idea of to co-found Stell Engineering was born. Malory, welcome, and we are so happy to have you.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm so glad to be joining the podcast.
I think we have you on mute, Malory, but that's all right. Again, just thank you for joining us today. And it was a privilege to meet you earlier this year. It's been exciting to see your guys' journey in Stell Engineering, just from idea to being funded to now you're an entrepreneur. So that's our first question, right? What does it feel like to be a co-founder and an entrepreneur? And is this something you always envisioned for yourself?
It's very exciting, and I think it's very empowering for my co-founder Ann and I to build a team from the ground up and have that team be delivering something together. In terms of did I see this for myself? Absolutely not. I thought I would be, an engineer my entire career, and going to Harvard Business School really opened my eyes to, being an entrepreneur. I saw my friends, my professors encouraging more entrepreneurial ventures, and it really clicked for me my first year there.
That's fantastic. So with that, it's not a typical journey to go from engineering to MBA, right? Back to back. So, kind of what was the precedent for that? What made you want to go to a business school right after, kind of such a short time frame and being an engineer, aerospace engineer, and then, such a prestigious school like Harvard. And then how did that influence, your launch of Stell Engineering?
Yeah, so I loved being an aerospace engineer. I think the meaning behind the projects I was working on, delivering commercial aircraft for Airbus or missile defense systems at Raytheon, I loved the mission, but honestly, I was frustrated with a lot of bureaucracy and just the tools and confidence that I had to go solve the problems that I saw that were out there. I think a lot of times we weren't delivering on time, and I think my coworkers didn't feel empowered. And, I thought, how can I start to solve these problems? And that's really why I looked at graduate school. And I went to an event actually at Stanford Business School for women. And I got so excited by the other women that were there that I decided I would apply to business school. I applied to Harvard just to see if I could get in. I didn't think that would come true. I got an interview, and going on campus, I just absolutely fell in love with really the physical campus, the people there, and I think what I saw that it could offer me just based on some of the alumni that I talked to. And I think 4 months later, I was on campus and starting the journey.
Awesome.
Very cool. I actually think this is kind of you. Malory and I are both engineers, so aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, and we both have MBAs.
Yeah.
So like you said, it is really unique. I did start out at Auburn though, so we're not going to hold that against you. And I don't know, Alex, how strict these SEC rivalries are. Yeah, we're just going to leave that there. We don't have enough time to go into that.
We'll park that.
I did go to Alabama undergrad too for engineering, so.
That's awesome.
Oh, awesome. But yeah, that's a really great example, right? If you look at just aerospace engineers, how many of them are, that it's roughly around 12%. So I know you came to the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance Women in Aerospace event last week. I was there as well. It was really great. We had I think it was 200 women in a conference room representing aerospace from a whole bunch of local fantastic companies. Some people flew in. It's inspiring to have a actual aerospace startup with two female co-founders. Can you share a bit about that experience and views on how the industry is transforming a bit to be a bit more diverse and inclusive there?
Yeah, so actually my co-founder Anne got to go to the conference last week, but I can talk a little bit about, she was so excited and it was such a big event for us. I think just knowing that there were that many like female leaders to go talk to about aerospace and defense, when Alex sent it to us, we were like, absolutely, one of us is going to this. In terms of like the industry changing in my experience, I think it's always been in the back of my mind. I started engineering courses in high school. I was usually the only girl in class. At Alabama, that was the same. Like I was one of the only women in my aerospace engineering cohort. Jessica, I'm sure it was similar for you. But I think once I started my career, it's really so many people stepped up to support me at Airbus, at Delta Airlines, at Raytheon. And so I always felt like there were great opportunities, especially, at Raytheon, I was able to join the women's group there and build relationships that way. And I found just stepping up to the table and kind of making things happen for myself, like as long as I did that, like there was always space for me at these companies. I think that like it is always in the back of my mind, like maybe when I first come into a room, someone doesn't realize I'm an engineer, will assume, I don't have a technical background. And I don't think it's malicious, but you always have to think about like, how can I present myself and my ideas to gain the right level of credibility and like have a productive conversation. And, more now, I think as a like CEO, Anne and I are focused on how do we support other women and how do we hire women and, just excel in this industry and kind of like represent that this is a thing that can happen. And, speaking to young women about why this is an exciting industry to be in and a great place to have a career.
Yeah, I think that's great. That communication, I think, is key there because, and it doesn't matter for a female, for a male, whatever. When you walk in and look at someone, you have no idea what their background is, what their experience is. So, kind of just going back to basics of, like you said, just opening up and saying, hey, what's your experience? What have you done? And then it definitely gives you kind of a chance to relate more to people in the room versus just trying to guess. So, I think those are some really great, I think, recommendations.
Yeah, thank you
sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just going to say thank you for sharing, Mallory. That's and thank you for being part of the change we need to see, right, and supportive of that. I mean, we need to see more of that in events like the Pacific Northwest Women in Aerospace event. So it's really inspiring and something we want to definitely see more of. So, but aerospace in general, right, is such a niche community. So it's great to see you and Anne be so active in all these industry events and all that. I mean, kind of what's been your overarching experience just breaking into the industry, right? It tends to be, primarily pretty conservative, traditional, right? Everybody kind of knows each other. So as a startup, how's it been going to all these conferences and, has it been receptive? Like what's just been your experience?
Yeah, I think it's been incredible. Actually, I have a funny story. Alex, the conference where we met you, we signed up for it a week before because we just move fast right now. We had just started the company and we showed up in our Stell sweatshirts and like a kind of a casual outfit. And we just walked up to people who were like, hi, we're from Stell. And everyone was in suits. They were super formal. So it was kind of a funny moment where the startup culture and like the traditional aviation, even though I was from that industry, we were like, oh, we're going to wear suits next time. But yeah, we've gone to a lot of like space conferences and I think it's amazing. You walk up, you try to get to know people, like what are they interested in? Why are they there? And we tell them our story. And I think a lot of times like that resonates on a human level. And, at a lot of these events, like people are excited about new technical solutions, new processes, new energy and ways of doing things. So I think we focus on that and we find a lot of commonality in the community there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's been accepted in the aerospace industry until you go to the Paris Air Show or Le Bourget in a full suit when it's 100 degrees outside. Once you do that, I feel that's our hazing titles.
Yeah. So Stell closed on a $3.1 million pre-seed round by Wingshoff Ventures and the third prime VC earlier this year. So congratulations on that, Malory. That's a huge win, right? Any lessons learned from that, right? Are you just going from idea to being funded, and the whole pitch process for any potential founder that's listening in?
Oh my gosh, it really was a process. So I think it's one of those things where it took 3 years, but also then 2 months to actually close it. Both of those things are true. When I was at Harvard Business School, that's when I first started working on the idea that became Stell. So that was 2020 during the pandemic. I was locked in my apartment. That's when I first wrote down some of the early ideas and business strategies behind the company. I think when Ann and I incorporated in October and like officially went to fundraise for the business with a very clear business plan and pitch, that experience, I think again, like we were very open. We told friends like what we wanted to build. We put it out there into the world and into our community, and a lot of the investors actually came to us through our network. So people that cared about aerospace and defense, industrials, and software, I think heard about what we were building, and that got them excited. And so a lot of our meetings we went into, we were already level set with the investors about what we want to see for the future world in 10 years and why aerospace and defense is important. And so that led to, just a lot of like fun and exciting conversations. Nicole Westhoff was actually one of our first pitches, and we ended up moving forward with her extremely quickly. And then she was a game changer in terms of closing the rest of the round for us. She introduced us to Third Prime, and we had set out to raise 2 million, and we actually ended up raising 3. And I think huge credit to her for, supporting us and helping us do that.
Oh, congratulations. So, they say that the hardest part about getting started is getting started. So what has been the hardest part, right? So you get your funding, and what, just getting things going, you go from business plan or idea to, hey, we're funded. What's next?
Oh gosh, I think the first thing is just don't be afraid. Like one of the biggest things that I've learned is, at school, I was unsure I really had the skills to go out and start a business. And I think just figuring out what is the next step in my process. Like, do I need to go to another successful startup and see how that's run? What will that solve for me? How can I grow my network of investors so that I could be successful fundraising? Like, I think just putting fear out of your mind and not thinking I don't have the skills, but thinking, how can I learn something or meet others that have done this and prepare myself to be successful? And I think Ann and I have learned, like, we step up to the plate to solve new problems each week, and like just leaning on each other and figuring it out together, I think is one of the most challenging and fun parts about the process. What else would I say? I think too, being successful in the early stage startup, like hiring the right kind of team. We took 2 or 3 months for each of the people we've hired to the early Stell team, but they're all so strong in multiple areas, and they're just like really high ownership, like high optimism, which is important when every week is different, and we're constantly thinking about how do we talk to our customers more, how do we solve problems for them, and it's very dynamic. So having a team that can be optimistic and able to perform in that environment is really key.
Yeah, I think you touched on 2 really important parts there. Like, I see it as the fight or flight mentality, right? When people get overwhelmed or they get hit with some type of challenge, do they sit there and freeze, or are they starting to fight it? And I think giving people that, how to look at the problem and break it up into small pieces and what's manageable. And is this a problem you guys can tackle by yourselves, or do you need to bring in someone to take a look at it? Really kind of helps them move forward. And the second one, just being that team building. I think people like they underestimate the importance of building out the right team with a combination of not just skills and technical, but personality types. That's something like when we started the Women in Manufacturing board, we were looking at personality types. If you threw 100% introverts in a room, that's not going to work well, but it's not going to work well with 100% extroverts either. So mixing up those personality types and finding where a few people are going to maybe push others outside their comfort zone, but in that professional setting, same thing with what are the gaps for some of those technical skills. You started as a startup. So as you grow, like we're always going to find gaps that are going to need to be filled with kind of that right person. So I think those two are really key in either being successful or falling backwards and taking much longer to do it.
Yeah. And I think I learned all of those building airplanes, right? Like you think, oh, we're going to build this new version of the Wi-Fi system for Delta Airlines. We have a year and a half. That sounds impossible. And so it's like breaking that down into small steps, no fear, just get started. And then finding the right team. And I think staying optimistic and having people, for me, the question is always, how can we make this successful and how can we get it done instead of how will we fail? And I think if you stay in that mindset, like that's when you can build airplanes and launch new companies, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just had a conversation recently with a startup company where they were trying to decide how to take their tech team and like do bug fixes versus the long-term roadmap. And I was like, have you asked your team? And it was funny because he's like, I actually have a guy that hates going back and forth. And this gets back to talking to your team about what do you guys enjoy doing? Because the more, someone enjoys their job, the more motivated they're going to be. That's just going to make it easier regardless of what position you're in and company. So I think all those tie together so great.
Absolutely.
So you just mentioned, Mallory, I mean, your experience in building airplanes and then, thinking big and being able to drive through that, the kind of guiding ethos of tech, right? And we see this from, a lot of tech. There's a lot of investment going into aerospace right now. You see a lot of folks coming over from tech and, it's, hey, move fast and break things, right? Move fast and break things. We just got to go fast and break things. And you're starting to find that, hey, look, doesn't quite work that way in aerospace, right? This is a different industry. We can't have things break because that's not good. And, you have the advantage of having an aerospace background, having been in the industry. So just curious on what your perspective has been, being part of this startup ecosystem, right? With that kind of tech background, but also your domain background in aerospace.
Yeah, I think when I first read the phrase like move fast and break things, I was like, absolutely not for like, in terms of like customer products, like, because I think for me, the mission is always paramount. And like when I was building commercial aircraft, that was safety of the passengers and then success of the airline. And then I think when you're building like anti-ballistic missiles, that is like an even higher mission of like, we cannot fail and this system must be successful. And so break things in terms of process doesn't feel right in that context. But for me, I think move fast and break things is, I think, questioning, like, can we have better systems? Like, I go to a lot of these conferences and people are always asking, how can the government allocate funding better? How can the government help us go faster? They're like, Congress is blocking us. And I always think, no, how can we build better systems? I think documentation of engineering, safety, like, I don't think any of that stuff is going away, but can we get better at performing to that level that the government needs? And so I'm always questioning things from that side. And then with the team, like, our processes, every time we hire a new team member or we onboard a new customer, all of our processes kind of break and we have to rebuild them from the ground up. And so I think being open to just coming to work that next week and rebuilding things, even though they're broken, but that being like an exciting moment to try something new.
That's great.
And I think your product focuses on engineering requirements, right? And documenting regardless. I mean, really, that's something that works for any organization. I think you guys are going to focus in specific areas, but just getting into the meat and potatoes of why are we doing what we're doing, documenting those requirements so you can always go back to it, so you can share it, so you can have a digital copy that kind of goes around. What are you targeting specifically from a market perspective or an organization to kind of get this on the ground and running?
Yeah, so we are targeting specifically aerospace and defense because we think the strongest need for requirements management and this kind of digital engineering in the supply chain exists there. And that's just because it's mission critical and the systems are super complex. And so we are targeting that. In terms of, we're a super small startup. So over the summer, we've looked for early partners that also want to be innovative. Their engineering teams are wanting to solve this problem, but not wanting to go with a legacy solution that, can kind of silo the team. So they're willing to take on a little bit of risk and build with us in order to get this innovative solution. So we've been looking at, our first customer is actually a sub-tier to Boeing and to SpaceX. So a little bit of, what you call like new space and then like a typical prime structure, which is exciting to us to solve this problem in both of those spaces. And beyond that, I think the startups in hard tech, like in space and defense, are super exciting partners as well. I think a lot of them have been doing requirements management in like Excel or Airtable. And so we're trying to meet them at that moment where they are, they're at Series A, Series B, they're launching constellations, or they're providing products to the DoD, and they need more assurance that their engineering is robust, and they're also scaling their supply chain. So our tool is meeting that moment, we think.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting that you're, and exciting, right? To see kind of your traditional companies in your new space and then trying to meet them where they are, right? They kind of have different problems, right? You have new space or newer players that are starting to put the infrastructure in place, and how do you scale? And then you got your more traditional players, so you said, is, hey, what technology, what innovations out there to allow us to go faster and streamline? So it's interesting to, I think you said it great, meet everybody where they are, and because everybody's in a different part of their journey. So with that, though, supply chain is and has been, right, a pretty hot topic in the industry. You hear it all the time. You see the headlines, right? Supply chain disruption. How do we streamline? With all the constraints that are going on, with all the demand that's happening. And Stell Engineering seems like you're right in the middle of it. So just curious, all the feedback I'm sure you're getting. So all these conferences and all these people you're talking to, like, how are you filtering, all these inputs and requests I'm sure you're getting from traditional and new, and how do you balance it all, right? Kind of what's been your process for that?
Yeah, I think for me, I always ground myself back in like, how does this help the engineer? That's like our main user persona, be more successful at their job, because I think those are the people propelling these companies forward. And they've historically had a very large paperwork burden and a lack of modern tooling. So anytime we hear, a feature request from someone, maybe in the C-suite, maybe a bit disconnected from that front line, I think we write down every idea we hear, but then going and validating that with users and like, does this solve your problem on an hourly, daily basis? And does this delight you in the workflow that you're doing? So I think that keeps us grounded, and we're just constantly showing our platform to customers and anyone that will give us feedback. And so just keeping that iteration loop going is how we, I think, chart a course for what the future looks like. I will add, though, like, a lot of the vision for what the product can become, like you have to keep that strong in your mind, like, because customers will ask us if we can have features of like the traditional kind of tool that's on the market that people don't like. And so then you have to pause and say, okay, I hear that you want to solve this problem instead of, oh, you want this button. So really saying, I hear you, and then asking more questions to figure out, could we solve their problem in a way that doesn't slow them down later and doesn't make the tool harder to use.
That's great. Your focus on the customer persona and really listening to who you're trying to serve is inspiring and really, really good to hear. So it seems like you guys are on the right track, which is awesome. So, speaking of hot topics, right, beyond supply chain, AI, right? So who isn't talking about AI and Chachi BT and just how fast this tech is moving? I mean, is that part of your guys' roadmap? And is that kind of coming into play? It's been so disruptive across multiple industries, multiple segments. And so just curious what, you guys are keeping on it and kind of how that potentially comes into play into your future vision and plans.
Yes, so AI has always been in our roadmap, and it's in our original pre-seed pitch deck back from November 2022. And the original reason for that was, building all of these aircraft and complex systems. I realized that a lot of how we define the systems was text. So how should it be processed? How should the codings work? How should the quality inspections be done and the documents be delivered? That's 90% of what defines a complex system, not the geometry. And a lot of the mistakes in the depths of the supply chain are made in those text instructions that are sent via PDF. So in my mind, if we can unlock all of this definition and results that's currently locked in these documents, I get really excited about building custom workflows for my customers to unlock that data set and use AI to empower, all of this information that they already have at their fingertips.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that was a funny one. Someone asked me recently about, Chachi BT, what would you do in aerospace? And I'm like, if I could take that book of engineering specifications and shove it in there and then have Alexa on top and just say, Alexa, how do I install this bond and ground type 2 on metal and composite? And it just filter through all of that and tell me. I was like, that would save so much time trying to dig into stuff. So trying to get people to, we talk about losing like the knowledge transfer, right? Between different generations, different people doing jobs. How can we take that knowledge that we're using in aerospace and put it in a digital library and then have tools to help you sort through it other than Control F to find a word in a PDF? As I think, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity there to take once we digitize that and put it into the next step where now we have something filtering and sorting and kicking it back to like, no, this is all I needed, not 20 pages on a specification. So I'm excited too to see like these startup companies like yours kind of come in here and make that a reality.
Yeah, you read my mind, Jessica. You should come join our product team. I won't say too much about what we're building, but it's really about empowering like talent. I saw a lot at startups that these, young engineers or, manufacturing techs were coming on the floor and, the question, like you said, how do I anodize aluminum? You can't even find the specification that has that information because 1, you don't know the name of it. 2, you don't know the system to go search for it. And 3, even when you type something into that search bar, it like doesn't really work. So for me, it's like, how can I better present information using AI? But for me, it's never been like AI will write systems engineering requirements. I don't think that's the future. I think it's all about people and talent and helping us go faster.
Yeah. It's the next level past YouTube, right? We couldn't search on YouTube how to do things. So now that we have that, this is like the next phase.
Incredibly exciting. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to our ready for landing takeaways, right? So prepare for landing takeaways. So our 3 takeaways. So the first one, aerospace and defense. Aerospace and defense the startup scene is buzzing, right? And all this VC that keeps pouring into the industry is incredibly exciting. And supply chain stability and security is really taking center stage, including such a pressure to get jobs and get our manufacturing industries back into American soil. So it's a really exciting time for our industry, and especially manufacturing. So, and then the supply chain workflows that have existed now for decades. I think there's a general recognition that they're outdated, right? But the reason for that is because it's been little incentive to introduce uncertainty and risk into those legacy workflows. But this growing industry pressure to modernize and be more competitive globally and bring things back into our U.S. soil is really forcing aerospace companies to rethink these conventional approaches. So it's exciting to look at startups like Stell Engineering, who are disrupting the industry, right, and really providing the tools and innovation for these, legacy companies or traditional companies, in addition to new space companies or newer aerospace companies, and meeting them where they are, so that we can modernize the supply chain workflows while not sacrificing mission assurance, right? So incredibly exciting, Malory, what you and your team are doing, and we look forward to seeing the rest of your journey, because we know you guys are going to go out there and do some amazing things. So really appreciate you being here with us and joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for having me on the podcast and for supporting Anne and I on the journey with Stell so far. We're so glad we met you. And thanks, Jessica, for the great conversation.
Of course, I always love having a fellow female engineer. So it's great. We don't see each other very often. And thank you for sharing your journey, kind of how you got Stell startup, and then what we're looking at in the industry. And for everyone else that joined us to hear, make sure you join us next month as we explore today's dynamic industry with distinguished visionaries such as Malory, and change makers, policy creators, and learning what the next innovative idea is that people are cultivating to help us across aviation, space, and defense. Thank you again for joining both Alex and myself on Wheels Up, and we look forward to see you next episode.
Thanks, Malory. Thanks, Jessica.